Michael Spivey with 3dprintmakers.com. And we were just talking about 3D printing and augmented reality. So, Brooke, what trends do you see in the maker community for late 2018 and early 2019?
It's funny, I think we've been stalled a little bit on, there's this big hype, and then the hype kind of died a little bit. So as far as like the newness of the machines themselves, owning a 3D printer, that's kind of faded a little bit. And I think the general, you can split most, maybe two to three different columns that I place most consumers in for 3D printers. One is just guys like me, like I like all the new stuff, and I think you're probably like that, right? How early did you buy?
2013.
Well, that's pretty early. So I was in it 2011 or 2010, and that was super early. But it was Make Magazine had it on the cover, and so saved up my money and got into it. But that kind of, this is awesome, new, I want to try it out. Did you experience, just be honest with me, did you experience when you got it, like it's really fun at first, did it fade at all with you? Did you kind of ask the question, what am I supposed to do with this?
Well, the possibilities and imagination with it continued. The dream continued. And I remember getting my first 3D printer. It was really slow.
Yeah. Which one was it?
It was the Da Vinci, one of the Da Vinci's.
I remember, yeah.
And you put the little spool of filament on the side. And my wife and I, we were actually moving, so we were staying at my grandparents', and we had the little machine set up and watched it go. And after 30 minutes, then we went away and came back after 8 hours, and it was still going on a little Yoda Buddha model.
Like a little, yeah, exactly. We were the same way. I did a bottle opener, and my whole family, as soon as it started, mine was a MakerBot cupcake back in the day. So it was like really loud, like really loud, Yeah. And so everybody kind of came in, and we watched it like a campfire. I mean, we were all just around the kitchen table for a while, and it was cool the first time. And then the second time, like one of my kids kind of watched for a little while. I was still riveted, but my wife wasn't interested. It like faded pretty fast, and they're like, "Well, show it to me when you're done." But like the noise and stuff, it went from the kitchen table to the kitchen counter to the laundry room to the garage finally, because it was like too loud.
Yeah.
But that was kind of how it went. So it was like really cool. Still, I agree that the dream continues. It does offer you this superpower. But the reality of like how long it takes, what the resolution is, how you have to fight with some models aren't really made to be 3D printed. It's not, plastic isn't the perfect material for everything, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
For a lot of things. But anyway, so I think with that, the trend has been, well, okay, so I'm not really a 3D printer guy. Some people say this. Like, well, I got one and I played with it for a little while, and then I put it aside. So I put people into those columns. There's people that are just adopting early and kind of they want to check it out. They may not want to spend a lot of money. So that is kind of burned out a little bit. The people that like want to be on the bleeding edge, that's kind of over for me. Mm-hmm. At least from my perspective, it is. The next column is like makers that like when they get it, like me, I just kept doing it. I mean, I was fascinated. I was all in. I learned all of the software. I taught myself how to 3D model. I was using SketchUp in the beginning, and then I moved to some other things, but then eventually Fusion 360. So I think we've established like who those people are. They call themselves makers, and even some would say, they're into rep rap. They believe in this kind of idealistic vision for 3D printers are going to help the world. And I do think that's true, by the way, but I think that it's kind of gotten, for the makers, the third column would be professionals. Like, and some of them even knew about this stuff before. They might have had one at work, and already used it, and some for like 10, 20 years. Like I've met people that have been using from the very beginning, like one of the first installations of one of the early machines. I talked to this guy and he's like, oh yeah, well, I've been working with it for 30 years. I'm
Oh,
like,
wow.
30 years? You were there at the beginning? Is like, oh yeah, we got one of the first machines. And it's extremely expensive. I never dreamed of having one at home, but then they realize, oh, now I can have one at home. So you got professionals, you've got makers, and you've got kind of a disenfranchised, or at least discouraged, or like, I don't know, maybe not, kind of the newbies that are just the curious.
The
So as far
regular
as,
consumers.
yeah, and I think that trend has kind of come to a wall where the machines are just not easy enough to use for newbies, period. So now I'm going to interview Bree Pettis on my next, well, I don't know if it's next week. I think it's next week or a week or two. And he was one of those guys that went out and was like, make anything at all. Like really, he was a very good marketer.
Mhm.
And so he kind of like rode that wave, that first wave, that swell of like, what, anything? This is awesome. Now it's true to a degree, but for some, what a lot of people didn't say, and he wasn't the only one. What a lot of people didn't say was, you can make anything if you learn to 3D design and you're willing to wrestle for hours with materials and like the idiosyncrasies of your machine. And like, if, yes, it's true. But for most people, they're like, oh man, it's too hard. So,
My analogy for that is I tell people it's more like buying a piece of lawn equipment or that you have to maintain and,
right.
do things with every now and then, rather than just a microwave where you pop it in and take it out 5 minutes later.
I love the microwave analogy. That's so true. I remember when we got one. I don't remember what year it was, probably before you were born. But I remember my mom got her first microwave. And, I was like, microwaves? This is like alien technology. How is the food getting hot when I open the door and there's no heat? I thought, I was amazed by it, but there was one dial and it was like an egg timer almost. It was
Yeah.
like, crank it up to the right. And that's it. There wasn't even a start button. You just, as soon as you move the dial, it was on and it's going. So, yeah, I burned a lot of things and whatever, but it was easy to use. And everybody in the family, there was no manual. There was only one thing you could do: open the door or start the timer. And that's like that's a great analogy to like the easy to use. A toaster is another one. You just, what else is there to do? Drop something in it and push it down.
Yeah.
So the 3D printer is not that.
So if someone's a maker and they love designing stuff and they like distributing what they make, what tactics or strategies have you found that do work in the world? Maybe it doesn't work for everything, but what's a couple of examples or one example where it does work?
Well, I'll say that middle category, the newbies, they're going to adopt whatever machines are out there, whether it's the cheap Chinese, Amazon.com printers. And I don't mean to pick on China. They just are really good at making cheap hardware. Mm-hmm. It's not always the best. It can be good, but there's always going to be stuff for those newbies to buy. And I never targeted them at the end. I thought I was going to be the winner of the race to the bottom, but I was wrong. I thought $300 printer was the winner when I made the Simple Makers Kit. But, that wasn't true. And so when I kind of realized like, oh no, there's a $200 printer coming and a $100 printer coming, and some even try to do things cheaper, but I leave those people alone. The professionals are like not as willing to share models. They have a professional environment. This is proprietary technology. They keep it quiet until they launch and all that. It's a tool to use for prototyping for them. And a lot of even makers printers are appropriate for them. But as far as the people that are interested in sharing models, I think it is the makers. It's that sweet spot of the guy that, like back when I was a kid and my dad used to take me to the mall, and he'd take me to those demos of that. I don't know if you remember this or not, but there was this one manual CNC style machine. Like you flipped it up this way and it was a drill press, and then you down this way and it was like a table saw. And then if you add this thing on and rotate it, it was a mill. Like it did all of these things. He was fascinated because the dream of doing all of these things, like all of these things right here in my garage was the dream. 3D printers, that dream. So those makers, I think, are the ones that are really engaging in, okay, I'm going to push my design skills and I'm going to develop something. One of the things that I've been a little disappointed with is a lot of, and I went to, what was it, the East Coast Rep Rap Festival, EARF is what they called it. There's also the Midwest Rep Rap Festival, which is kind of the granddaddy of the open source guys. Those guys are like our people. Those guys believe in what this is going to become. They're in early, they have skills, they're coders, they're designers, they're enthusiasts. And those are the folks that are actively designing and tweaking, and they're just not going to Thingiverse or whatever you imagine or whatever, and downloading stuff and printing it, which is more the newbie stuff. They're designing. So there is, I will say that there is as a coder, you will understand this. It's hard to share a project with somebody.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like if you and I decided, hey, we're going to make, quadcopter. I'm going to design a little bit and then I'm going to hand it off to you. How do we even do that?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's like, well, you're going to have to like get a step file from Fusion. Maybe you do, your design on some open source, open SCAD or something. Well, that won't work because that's coding, So there's not like GitHub had something for a while, but then it didn't like take or something. It's not widely adopted, but they may have even abandoned it. But Fusion 360 is the way that I have, and Autodesk doesn't give me any money, never has. But that is what I used at my shop. So I would start designing something, and I would literally give like my junior engineer, I'd say, okay, I did the first iteration. Now, can you fix all of the junk that I didn't do and the nuts and the bolts? Can you put it in? Can you tweak it? Can you change it? And with Fusion, you can share those files. So that was, for me, like a watershed moment where, hey, I've got 2, 3, 4 people now designing on the same model. And then when I open it up, it manages all of those revisions. So that's not, and some people just don't use Fusion 360, whether it's a fear of the complexity or whatever it is. Maybe they're a SolidWorks person, maybe they don't want, they want open source instead. But anyway, that's a problem. So how do we share a design with somebody? But as far as like releasing if I'm going to be the only designer, that's a lot easier in today's 3D printing world, right? Like you design the quadcopter, I maybe download it, try to print it. I feed back to you, and then you make the changes for a better version. I wait on you, and then I download it again, and oh, there, it's perfect. And then we release the STL.
Is there a ratio where you see a lot of collaboration for a lot of projects, or is it 10% multiple people collaborating on a model and 90% are single makers? Or how do you see the makeup of that?
Well, I think probably 99% are individual makers. And this is the disappointment for me. When I went to EARF, the talk that I gave was like, hey, can we get together and like share, like not reinvent the wheels 7 times, because you saw like, if you just go search Thingiverse or whatever repository for quadcopter, you see 100 different models, and many of them are similar, but everybody just says, well, I'm going to do my own thing. And I think that's the shame of it all. And I think that's where we're not, there's no snowball effect. There's no momentum. It's just like a guy doing his thing. And, if I do a design alone and don't show anybody and release it, it's going to be riddled with problems. I mean, I can't be everything for everybody. And so when I do get feedback on things, I can, or if I involve, like when Printrbot was alive and I had Mark, he was my junior engineer, he saw things I didn't see. And so I really believe the maker community, the value of the maker community isn't the tools or the printers or the things that we're printing. It's, can we get these people together? It's the people, because when I'm with, like when I go to a conference or even like a Skype like this or a Google Hangout or a live stream, like I'm always blown away with like, oh man, that was such a good idea. I didn't even think about it from that angle. So I think these tools have to become more, uh, social in the way that we would like sit around in a garage and like work on a car. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Like a
that's a good
couple of buddies.
analogy.
Yeah, guys come down and like he's grabbing the wrench and he's holding the thing and like so many things working on a car, you need a couple of guys or you need your son out there helping or whatever. So I really think that making is sort of a social experience, but sadly, well, while the internet is a wonderful thing, because like I don't even know where you're at right now. You could be in Timbuktu. I don't even know.
Yeah.
And I'm in Lincoln,
I'm not
California.
in Timbuktu though.
Where are you?
I'm in right outside of Charlotte, North Carolina.
Okay, but still, we're a long ways from each other, and we're having a conversation like a couple of guys, having a beer or whatever. That's a brilliant thing. But if I wanted you to come over and work in my car or help me with a quadcopter design, how do we even do that?
Yeah. So quick question there is 3D modeling. That's a fundamental practice for 3D printing. And 3D modeling also happens to be the fundamental element in something like augmented reality.
Sure.
Do you see those audiences overlapping at all? Or do you see 3D print set of makers as a separate audience, whether it's on the maker side or on the consumer side, from the people that want to do something with augmented reality? Any overlap there or completely separate?
Well, I think it's converging, but it was awkward at first. Like early on, this guy walked into my shop, and I forget how he came in, but this was the first year, and I was like, "Who are you?" "Well, I saw you at Kickstarter, and what's his name knew me, and he knew you, so I'm here." "What do you do?"
And this was back in 2011?
Yeah, it might have been 12, but yeah, it was early,
Okay.
first year. And so I was like, "Well, what do you do? Why are you into this?" And he said, "Well, I'm a sculptor." And I'm like, "Really? So what do you sculpt?" "Oh, I do a lot of stuff for Marvel. I do stuff for DC." And I'm like, "What? How do you do stuff for both?" He's like, "Yeah, I'm the first sculptor to do, like a consultant. They got special permission so I can work for both camps." And I'm like, "Oh my goodness." And he says, "The frustration is I was an analog guy. I can like do, Incredible Hulk, like 2 feet tall on my kitchen table with like 20 pounds of mud or whatever, clay. In like half an hour, I get really close and then it's detail work. So that's fast. But to learn these digital tools, oh my gosh, it's so hard." And so I'm like, "Well, are you jumping in?" He's like, "Oh, I'm all in. We're going to use the digital tools." I forget what the name of that program is. Do you know any of these sculpting programs? What's the most popular?
I don't, but I think they're made by Autodesk. And I know they had like 1, 2, 3 Sculpt maybe. And
That
1, 2, 3
one
something.
was good, but there's another one. Somebody out there listening will know. But anyway, there's some very good sculpting tools, but it's art. You know what I mean? So it's not
Yeah.
about dimensional accuracy. So there's kind of a split between artists over here and mechanical design over here, and nary the two shall meet. It's like almost like that. And then there's this idea of like, okay, and the iPhone, we're getting there. This phone, it was hard for me to let go of the button, but I've got a OS 10 or whatever it's just a big screen, right?
Yeah.
Now to unlock it has to look at my face. And so I feel like, oh, this is coming, because it's doing like points all over my face and it's scanning me. Yeah. So I think those things are getting easier. I have a structure scanner. Have you ever messed with that? The structure scanner?
I've messed with a few and they did not turn out that great.
That's the problem, to get a really good scanner. And what I'm trying to connect here is whether it is art. Like I had a friend, he's done fantastic work. He got endorsements from these companies that had laser scanners that cost 10, 20,000 back in 2011 or 12. He got endorsements from Autodesk and all those guys. He would go to museums and he would scan like Michael, what was it? All of the great artists, the sculptors, and he would release those on Thingiverse, complete open source. And it was even like at the time, like, is this legal? Is this supposed to happen? What's going on? And the museum culture is fascinating because they don't want to. They actually don't want to share with other museums. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like some were frightened. Like, if you release a scan, then they'll be able to have these exhibits, because none of the exhibits are real. It's just all plaster casts and stuff. But anyway, those laser scanners are dimensionally accurate, and they were very expensive. Well, these scanners are widely disappointing. There's a bunch of Kickstarters. I bought every one.
Mm-hmm.
And there were several, they got a little better and a little better and a little better. But man, I went to Microsoft, and I just, Microsoft was a fan of Printrbot, and I met some of the guys on the team, and they would say, have you tried the Xbox 360 camera? And I'm like, oh, I have one of those. Let me try that. It was fantastic. It was really good. The Kinect, yeah. And then they came out with the next version. That was fantastic, even better. And so I don't think a lot of people know that. I don't know if it's a software tool chain or what's going on. I'm not a Windows guy, so I had to get software for Mac that, it was difficult. But I think we're getting to the place where these phones are probably the best example of, two cameras. You got scanning your face and stuff. So maybe that we will live in a world where we could just pick up our phone, scan something, and it will produce a dimensionally accurate version of something. Because art, it just has to get close. It's art, like whatever.
Yeah.
We're not fitting a nut in a screw. But my brother-in-law is a mechanical engineer, and he asked me like 4 years ago. He was like, "Hey, what scanner should I buy if I want dimensionally accurate stuff? Because we got to like build pipes and electronics coming together and all that." And I was like, "No, it's not going to happen. That doesn't exist. It's very, very. It's $100,000 and a team of people and days of scanning and all that. That stuff exists, but it's like way up there." So anyway, I'm hopeful for the day that we all have tools in our pocket that can take advantage. And maybe at first it's art, like on your site on, what is it, 3dprintmakers.com.
3dprintmakers.com.
Like you just taught me something today where I can, with iOS 12, I can do this augmented reality thing. And it's fun. You know what I mean? It's fun. And that's an important element. But we also need dimensionally accurate. Because this dream, you see the commercials on television, this dream of like to interact with something. Like I have a bridge head, it's like it's not, I have an old Oculus, but that like made everybody sick. And then the next one I got was the structure sensor on a headset, and my iPhone like sits in there. Pretty cool. And it's like pretty freaky what's possible, but I would love to design, or for art especially, that sculptor could like use his hands again instead of these awkward like mouse and all that. So the tools, it's the software, and a software guy, that software is a magical thing when you can enable somebody to do something they would never be able to do before. But we're not there. It's converging, but it hasn't crossed the streams yet where we all benefit. There's little hints like your site, but I don't think we're there yet. I do think that kids and these newbies, when it gets to that, where instead of like, okay, hold down command, press S, type in the dimension in inches or millimeter, like that's geeky stuff. But if a kid could like get a blob of clay in front of him, and start to like push and like make things and then print that. Now we have the tools that make it fun, and 3D printing becomes something again that is like the magic is back. If that makes sense.
I agree. And I think it's those magical use cases that just kind of light up and you know it when you see it. But same thing with programming. You want, let's say, your kids to be exposed to programming at an early age, but if you expose them to a whole lot of typing, it's not going to make it fun, and they're not going to like programming. But if you can make it they have certain programs out there to help teach kids more with like block diagrams that they can put together with a puzzle. and they get the concepts and they're working their minds and they're building programs, but it's not all of this, like you were saying, Command C and typing out a lot of text. But thanks, Brooke, and thanks for taking the time to talk to me. Did you want to take a minute just to talk about what you're currently working on?
Well, Printrbot has gone out of business, and so my next thing is, it's in some ways really painful, in some ways a wonderful thing, that now I get to do what I want to do. Like, there's nobody telling me what to do anymore, or there's no obligations from customers. So I'm going back to my roots, and I'm going to continue to build machines, 3D printers. The idea on patreon.com/BrookDrumm. If you want to support me, you can go there and kick in a couple of bucks. But what I'm doing is starting in next month, we're going to release I'm going to release videos on a periodic basis. And you're one of my patrons, so thank you, by the way. I really appreciate it.
We're excited to see what you crank out.
I can't wait. So the first thing is going to be a 3D printer, and it's going to be something that you can build in your garage or on your kitchen table. And it's not a product, it's a project. But for those that are into making, it'll have some unique characteristics, and it'll be useful. And then we'll move on to CNC. I want to do a water jet. We're still wondering about, do we really need to do a laser cutter? Is there one laser cutter if you're into adding that tool? So we might do that. We might just endorse one or modify one. But anyway, what I want to do is gather the folks around me that love making. They love exploring this enthusiast hobby, whether they're professionals or they're just doing it because they love it. There's a certain amount of tools in your garage that when you can CNC, when you can 3D print, when you can laser cut, and the last one is water jet, believe it or not.
Oh, really? I haven't heard of that one yet.
So water jet is kind of like a laser cutter, but it will use water and sand that is kind of put into the stream and high pressure water to cut metal.
Oh, cool.
So you can actually I need a new,
And is it purely 2D or is it 3D?
It is. It's 2D.
Okay.
I mean, there's some fancy machines that actually rotate the nozzle, because anytime you cut with the laser cutter or water jet, there's a curve. Like if you got under a microscope and look at the profile, it starts at the top, and by the time it gets to the bottom, it erodes the material at the top a little bit. So there's some that kind of adjust with a head that moves, but it's 2D, like laser cutting. Okay. And that is like the tools, going back to my dad when he was looking at that mill / table saw / drill press / whatever. I think that's the set of machines. If you have a water jet, laser cutter, CNC, and 3D printer, you can literally make anything. So once the tools kind of arrive in our garages, like I even remember neighbors that got new saw tables, and they were kind of the talk of the town. Like, oh, that's a nice saw table. You're cutting straight lines, but it was a big deal because you can cut them reliably over and over again. So there's a set of tools that we're all starting to warm up to. 3D printers is an easy one because there's no big pile of sawdust or shop vac or whatever. Yeah. But these tools in 3D design, whether it's Fusion 360 or some open source program, the same tool, Fusion 360, allows you to water jet, laser cut, CNC. So now I have the software that does everything. I just need to learn that side of it. But there's the software designing in 3D has kind of pushed a bunch of people they don't know it yet, but their ability to make things even in metal they're there. They just need to be, like, hey, let me show you how to do this now. You already drew the part. And, if you do a part for your bicycle or motorcycle in plastic, well, great, everything fits, but you're never going to use that in real life. Let's make that in metal. So I think that's what we're becoming as not just America, but the world is there. These new tools are opening up new possibilities, and I want to help get us there inexpensively. You don't have to spend $20,000 to have these tools. I think you could get the whole set for probably under $5,000, which is an investment, but a little bite at a time, or choose the machine you want to focus on. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to do videos with projects. I'm still going to do 3D printing stuff. You know, but now it's just I get to explore all of these interests and share it with the world. So that's what I'm doing.
Great. Well, we're looking forward to seeing all that and seeing what comes, and we'll talk to you later. Thanks, Brooke.
Thanks so much, Michael. Take care,
Bye.
man.